All right, mamas, we are here with Kayle Koepke. I am Dr. Sue McCready, pediatric physician and soulful mama strategist. And Kayle is an experienced psychotherapist based in New York City who brings over 25 years of expertise in helping women and couples embrace their fullest potential for pleasure, play, and personal power. Through her counseling center, Restore Renew Therapy, and her sex, love, and relationship coaching business, The Sensual Alchemist, Kayle integrates various transformative approaches to support her clients, including cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic therapy, internal family systems, and tantric traditions. Kayle offers a comprehensive toolkit to guide individuals and couples towards embodiment, healing, enhanced intimacy, and deeper connection with sacred sensuality to cultivate fulfilling and meaningful lives in alignment with their desires. Doesn't that all sound awesome? Like, yes, yes, and yes.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about euphoric restoration and exploring the healing power of pleasure. And we get to embark on a journey with Kayle and uncover the transformative power of pleasure and explore practical ways to practice this and increase pleasure in our lives. And I would love to hear how on earth you got to this point about talking to women about enhancing pleasure in their lives. I think it might have to do with a personal journey of yours.
Yes. I assume you want me to share that personal journey right now.
A little bit. We want to
Yeah, I
know.
would love
For
to.
sure.
I mean, I grew up in the Midwest with an evangelical Christian background. So sex was not part of the discussion. And in actuality, if anything sexual was in my purview, it was something to feel a lot of shame about,
Mm,
especially as a female. So I married very young at 22. I didn't really know much about pleasure or anything. I didn't know getting into marriage about anything growing up evangelical Christian. So for years and years, I was very disconnected to any feeling or sensation in my body. Even as a psychotherapist, I was very heady and would talk to
mhm,
clients about, mostly their cognitive distortions, but I had no ability to feel into my body. And so, but I was still dealing with a lot of anxiety and insecurity as a therapist. And at some point, I came across material that had to do with your own sexuality as a woman. And I had never
mm,
considered that to be very important in our ability to grow as people. But I needed to explore this because I had a client with an issue that had to do with her sexuality. So I started to research it. And so doing, it was like this wealth of information that I had been missing out on all my life, which is how to connect with yourself as a sexual being and the potential that pleasure has to completely change your life, like give you confidence in all the things we're about to talk about. And as it began to transform and change my life, I started to make this more of an integral part of the work that I do with women and couples, because
mm.
to be connected to all of you, not just parts of you that are the acceptable parts that in my case, I grew up as acceptable and unacceptable, is actually to really be stepping into your full self, your full confidence, and feeling really grounded and supported by yourself, right? It really
Mm,
helped me to find grounding within myself, that I was looking outside of myself, which was creating a lot of the anxiety and the insecurity that I had just thought was everybody's normal experience, but not realizing that it actually was as a result of not really being connected to myself fully.
got it. So this was a journey of yours, learning how to connect with yourself in this way,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
and then sharing it with your clients to
Right.
support them.
Right. And pleasure is
Beautiful.
a huge aspect of that, right? Because sexuality is hand in hand with pleasure. And I wasn't really experiencing that either, right? It was just kind of like dreadful day after dreadful day and trying to do my best to get through it.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, in my work with clients, really being able to use pleasure as a way to heal old wounds, trauma, updating limiting beliefs, and the way in which it was able to really work with clients I'd never seen with talk therapy alone. So then I really
Mm.
became focused on it to a degree of getting certified in it and really trying to incorporate it with everybody, whether they're coming to me for sexual issues or not.
Beautiful. Okay, so why pleasure? Like how does pleasure, possess such a transformative power to heal and
Right.
restore us?
Well, right. First, I just wanted to point out that when we talk about pleasure, I'm defining that as any sensation that feels good
Feels good.
inside your
Mhm.
body or to your body, right? That's how I'm
Mhm.
defining it. And as we're talking about, what I've discovered is that pleasure is an extremely effective tool for healing due to the effect that it has on our nervous system. So, the little background is that every time we have a distressing experience of any kind, or even think about having a distressing experience, our bodies register a corresponding feeling or sensation of distress. And when we simply notice it and allow ourselves to feel the distress, it will simply
Mhm.
passes through us, it moves on, and maybe we even learn something valuable from it. But
Yes.
as speaking as someone who's worked with people as a psychotherapist for over 25 years, it's really hard to get people to feel something that they don't want to feel. And most people don't want to feel any kind of negative emotion, but they need to in order to experiencing healing and liberation. So
Yes.
average person has years of unprocessed emotion that has now become like a reservoir of pain that understandably feels too overwhelming and too intimidating to feel. And women tend to openly express more than men, but
Mhm.
emotions still like rage and passion are typically suppressed. And by the way,
Yeah.
rage and passion elicit the same somatic response in the body. So when you think about
Hmm.
it, like passion and anger both elicit your body heat starts to rise, your muscles tense towards action, your blood starts
Mhm.
pumping, and there's like this restless thirst that longs to be quenched, right? So
Mm.
women who don't feel comfortable feeling rage, as an example, are also not going to be able to feel comfortable feeling passion, right?
Mm.
So, which means it's going to be harder for those particular women to reach their pleasure potential in the bedroom because it feels really uncomfortable or even shameful to feel passion.
So yeah.
Yeah. So in general, when you suppress one emotion, you significantly suppress or change the vibrancy
Mm.
of all the rest, including pleasure. So over time, unprocessed emotions begin to feel like a reservoir of pain that
Mhm.
well, like I mentioned that, but and conversely, when we experience pleasure, our body sends a signal to the brain that it is safe to relax. And when the nervous
Mm.
system relaxes, it's able to begin the process of cleaning out all the garbage or the stuck emotions that it's been holding on to because it hasn't felt safe enough to feel. Right. So, like, let's say when you were growing up, you could not, when you felt anger or sadness, your parent moved away from you, maybe in disgust. Right. So then you hold on to that because it's not safe to feel, and you continue to hold on to that throughout your life. But when you start to feel relaxed, the first thing the body intuitively and naturally wants to do for you is to push out these emotions. Right.
Mm.
So then sometimes that's what keeps us from being able to feel pleasure, because when we relax, we start to feel these bad feelings. So pleasure can sometimes be associated with some of these negative feelings. So that's another thing that we're kind of having to deal with. But when you intentionally mix pleasure with the pain, it becomes easier to feel. So pleasure can become like a life preserver in that reservoir of pain. It allows you to feel safe and
Mm.
secure as you're splashing around and feeling all that has gone previously unfelt. And so, and feeling pleasure, it's really affording you this amazing opportunity to really honor yourself and what you've gone through that was previously unnoticed, not just by others, but also by yourself. So pleasure is not only healing, it's a profound act of self-love. And then there's kind of some of the obvious things, like when you feel pleasure, you feel your most confident, right? Or you feel,
Expansive. Yeah.
strong, motivated. We're more likely to take
Mm-hmm.
risks. We can think more clearly and come up with creative solutions. We're more likely to be generous or take initiative. We're more patient and forgiving. We feel peace and contentment and joy, and we're more likely to believe the best instead of the worst in ourselves and others. And then when we have shared pleasurable experiences, whether it be with my child or my partner, it enhances intimacy and trust and connection
Mm-hmm.
and communication and bonds. And then I think lastly, pleasure is just a vital aspect of self-care, of self-discovery, really learning about yourself and personal growth. And then by embracing pleasure, we are able to tap into our authentic needs and desires, right? Because it's very self-focused, and we're able to cultivate deeper connections with ourselves and create a sense of balance and harmony and happiness. And ultimately, pleasure is like a fundamental part of the human experience that contributes to our overall quality of life and allows us to fully embrace the richness and beauty of being alive.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So there's so many things I'm thinking about. So what
Mm,
I'm hearing you say is that pleasure is actually a way to process through unprocessed emotions that we may not otherwise be open to allow. Like people always say, feel the feels, and sometimes it's just really hard to feel the feels. Like sometimes we're so repressed, like it's just hard to
right.
feel that. Like for me, it's anger. Like it's just like I don't know, it just doesn't really flow from me, right? I'm sure it's repressed in
Absolutely.
there for
Right.
sure. Um, so what I'm hearing you say is that pleasure is actually a way to help you process through on other unprocessed emotions that you may not be open
Yeah.
to feeling.
Right. Right.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I think about is why do you think so many women deny themselves pleasure?
Hmm.
When men go, I feel like my stereotypical man is like, right? That's all
Yeah.
stereotype. And I'm like, man is like pleasure, 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 pleasure. Like what have you learned about that? I'm so curious.
Yes, I love this topic because this is where I get on my soapbox. But a lot of it, most of the reasons either fall into one or two categories: conditioning,
Hmm.
because we've been conditioned very differently than men, and context, because women tend to be really a lot more sensitive to context than men do. And so
Okay.
conditioning, um, you know, the majority of women, if you live in our society in this day and age, especially if you're more my generation, we've been conditioned to please and to serve. And we traditionally have a very hard time directly asking for what we need, especially when it comes to
Yes.
pleasure, because we've been taught that, to take a passive role in sex and in our pleasure. And we certainly have a difficult time asking for what we need them to do in order to feel pleasure. And typically we're really more focused on our partner and making them happy, and feel
Hmm.
selfish when we just focus on our own pleasure. And that's what I hear over and over amongst women that I see. And then there's also conditioned sexual shame. That's not as bad as it was when I was growing up, but it's still there.
For sure.
Yeah, and we've been raised to feel shame about our sexuality and the freedom to be sexually exploratory or act on our sexual urges without feeling some sort of shame for doing so. I mean, like when I think about even my daughter and my son, they're 14 and 16, just still even today, like if the girl has a lot of sex with somebody, they're considered a slut, and the boy is still considered cool if he does. Or,
Mm.
I started thinking like, if we might pause and wonder, like, what happened to this girl if she's like masturbating all the time and watching porn as much as her male counterpart. But if a boy is doing that, we're just thinking that's totally normal.
Normal boy.
Right, just boy behavior, right?
Mm.
And I would view my kids the exact same way. As liberated as I am, I would still be like, what's going on with my daughter that she's masturbating this much? But with my son, I'd be like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
those messages have a really
Fascinating.
insidious impact on a woman's ability to
Hmm.
feel pleasure, because they've unconsciously associated pleasure with shame. And all she might know consciously is that she rarely desires sex and doesn't know why. But underneath that is that there's the sexual shame that's reduced, the likelihood that she might feel anything or even feel comfortable enough to explore what it is that feels good. So she might not even know.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then-
Unconsciously coupled
yeah,
pleasure with shame. Wow.
right, right.
That's a big knot to unravel.
Exactly. It is. And that's where we do some of
Especially
the
if you want to be the good girl, like
exactly.
I was the good girl for
Yes,
sure. Want to be the good girl,
exactly. You want to be accepted.
rewarded for being the good girl. Yeah,
Right. And even, yeah, nobody wants to be left out of any kind of group. It's within our nature to want, we're herd
of
pack
course.
animals, right? And so
Yeah.
even if we have these desires, we're going to suppress them and hide them, which was my situation, right? Because of not wanting to be picked out of the group for something negative.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then I
Okay.
think there's also the conditioning that I mentioned earlier, which is that when we suppress one emotion, we suppress all of the emotions to some degree. And so if
Mm.
we're walking around with all of these unprocessed emotions within us, pleasure can't move into that space because, let's say, maybe anxiety is stuck there, or irritability, or depression, or indecisiveness,
Mm.
numbness, or despair, or these feelings that are really painful to feel, that build up over time. It's hard to feel pleasure until we remove that. So that's another reason why people have a difficult time feeling pleasure. And then there's
I
context.
like that visual. I like that visual. Like pleasure can't take space where
Yeah,
anxiety is taking all the space. Like that. That's a nice visual. Makes sense.
yeah, yeah. And also a motivation to like work through your emotions, right?
Yes.
Sometimes we're like, well, why do it? Right? Like
Hmm.
life seems to be going so well, or going okay, right? But when pleasure is so potent and is so feels so good, and it has all these benefits, then it's might be worth working through some of these unprocessed
Yeah.
to feel it.
I agree. I
Yeah,
agree. Because for me, that's definitely anger. That would be the
yeah,
emotion for sure.
right,
Unprocessed anger.
right.
Mm.
Well, we'll talk about in a second what you might be able to do for that. Um,
Oh, okay.
but then there's also context. Like I said, women are very sensitive to context. We're amazing at being able to multitask, as an example.
Hmm.
But when it
Yeah.
comes to pleasure, it requires you to be single focused and present in the
Wow.
moment, right? Nobody's had an
That's a
orgasm thinking about lunch, right? You have to be
no.
focused on your pleasure in order to feel pleasure. So
I really think there's some masculine, feminine brain wiring differences there.
yeah,
Because that's a big thing for me. I'm like, okay, so and so is here, so and so is there. I'm like, my brain is everywhere. But yeah, you're exactly right. It requires single focus, and that can be
exactly.
difficult.
Yeah, this is where I think the male brain actually works better in that department, right? Because that's
Totally.
for them to be single focused and present
And
in the moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, it's no big deal. Let's go. Like
Mhm.
a lot of parts and
Exactly.
pieces.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest complaints, if you will, that women come to me with, is that they have a difficult time getting out of their heads and into their body,
Hmm.
only thinking about one thing, which in this case is pleasure, right? So that really
So
suggests,
conditioning and context. Okay, makes sense. That's
and
how
then
you
women
reprocess.
are tend to take the caretaking role and in the home. right? And so much of the time, women are too tired to work on pleasure because it just feels like another thing that they have to give their partner. She's exhausted. She has no time for herself. She's resentful of her spouse for not helping more, right? So then it feels like something else she has to give. And the mindset needs to change that this is actually something for you. Like
For
maybe
her.
the
Yeah.
more caretaking you are, the more you need to do this for yourself, right?
Hmm.
But instead, it just feels like it's just another thing. And that's not the last thing that they want to be able to give to the person who they're resentful to for not helping out, right? And then I would say that the last contextual barrier to pleasure is the unconscious shutdown that occurs after a woman has been violated. And
Mm.
um, and many women are living with the effects of being violated and not even aware that this is the reason for their shutdown. And what I've noticed in my work as a sex coach is that every woman, at the very least, at some point or another, has pressured themselves to do something that they weren't ready to do or weren't fully on board with, even with a trusted partner. Right. So many women place pressure on themselves to be or feel or do something that they aren't fully into with every sexual encounter that they enter, and don't even think twice about how that might be violating their bodies. But when we force our bodies to do something that they're not ready to do, it's going to shut down feeling because it doesn't feel safe. So if you do this enough, it actually can develop a conditioned response of shutdown that shows up in any sexual experience, no matter how much you trust your partner. Right. So those are some of the contextual, but whenever a client comes to me and they say, I don't feel anything, first, I think maybe your context doesn't feel safe. And by that, your current context might feel safe, but you're bringing in past context that did not feel safe, and your brain makes a match and says, oh, we're in a sexual situation again. Oops, same thing, we need to respond the same way. Better be safe than sorry. And everything shuts down.
Hmm.
And most of the time it's all unconscious. So they're not sure why. They just think there's something wrong with me or my partner.
Wow, there's a lot in there. It makes perfect sense. I'm so curious about how you unravel all of this.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot to unravel, but it seems like you've gone into these mysteries and figured some things out.
Yeah. 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 Well, a lot of it is, and the work that I do to help women to, reestablish that profound connection between the mind and the body. And in
Hmm.
so doing, the tools that we're using to update those limiting beliefs that typically are really stored in the unconscious and the limbic system, and that's difficult to access, right? That's
Hmm.
part of the problem.
So I know for the freebie, you're giving us the Sacred Sexuality Starter Kit. It
Mhm.
sounds like this may be the start of something moving forward. Do you want to share a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 5 tools that are in the Sacred Sexuality Starter Kit are the body's natural way of becoming present, of healing itself and turning itself on, right? So
Mm.
those are breath, sound, movement, mindfulness, and sexual energy. Right. And so they're not anything new. You're just utilizing the body's own way. It intuitively knows how to it doesn't like holding on to these things. It doesn't like holding on to limiting beliefs, right? So you're using the ways in which it already can heal itself, and intentionally using it in this way. So breath, as an example, is one of the most powerful tools that we can use to update, to access the unconscious, because it moves past when you do a breath work process, it moves past the prefrontal cortex and the ego, and it gets into the body, and where
Hmm.
all of these limiting beliefs are stored, and we're able to speak into it a new updated belief that is the truth or the thing that you're trying to believe. So maybe you think, I don't deserve pleasure. And what you're telling yourself as you're breathing is, I deserve pleasure, or I'm a pleasure goddess, or whatever it is that floats your boat that you want to believe about yourself, right? And also it really helps you to stay present in your body, which of course enhances pleasure. And sound does the same thing, except sound also adds a vibration in your body. It helps you to stay present in your body. But we're very heavily controlled with our sound and also our movement. But that is actually one of the best ways to release emotions, is through sound and also through movement, because an emotion is an energy. And when
Yes.
we don't process it, it stays stuck. And when we start to do some of these tools, the energy starts to move, and we can process and move it out. So movement is another way in which we can work with the emotion as we're trying to move it out. But also it can help with pleasure. Sometimes we get into rote movements that we just do over and over again, and trying something new and being really intentionally exploratory about a new way of moving that might feel good could be really helpful. And then mindfulness, of course, is pretty intuitive. We're all pretty familiar with that. It helps to stay single focused and to exercise your brain's ability to stay single focused. And then sexual energy. And that's the funnest one, in my opinion. And it's the most important, because it's the sexual energy. We have all kinds of energy running and coursing through our body, but sexual energy is the most powerful, right? Because when we pair a thought or an experience with a pleasurable feeling, then we create a new neural connection, right? So we can, if you get sexual energy going through your body, which I'm going to give you a little sample of in a second, then you can pair that with anything you actually want to manifest, as an example. Or it can, if you breathe it up through your chakras, you can clear out a lot of emotions and your chakras in so doing. And then also it's just hugely turns on. It's like your body just lights a switch, and it's like your body turns on, and your pleasure potential is much greater in those moments.
Fun. That sounds fun.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to just do a simple example for you and our listeners and it incorporates all of them to some degree. Just to give you a bit of a sample of what it feels like. So just take a moment, maybe close your eyes, and just take notice of what it is that you're feeling in your body, so we can check how it feels now and how it will feel after. And then I want you to, on the inhale, I want you to squeeze or tighten your pelvic floor or your perineum, almost like a Kegel. And so on the inhale, you're going to imagine, you're going to squeeze your perineum, your pelvic floor. And you're going to inhale, and you're going to imagine that you're inhaling all the way up to the crown of your head. And then on the exhale, you're going to sound it out. Okay, so we're going to do this together. So you're going to breathe in and then sound it out. Breathe in. Ah. And just notice how you feel in your body after doing this a few rounds.
One of the things I feel is a lot more heat in my body. A lot of heat.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the sexual energy just starting to ramp up a bit, right? You're like priming the pump when you squeeze your pelvic floor area. And that gets kind of the juices flowing. It wakes your body up a little bit. The sounding and the breath, when you do the breath in that way, it can make you feel a little bit lightheaded, but that means it's really, you're doing it right. And then the sounding is such a relief, and having to do all of these at the same time help you to be focused on one thing, because you can't really be thinking about lunch and doing all of these things at the same time. If you did this for like 20 minutes, you would see much bigger
huge shift.
Yeah. And with the Sacred Sexuality Starter Kit, it's a focusing on one of these tools at a time. So you can really master one at a time, and then try them out with yourself as well as with a partner. And see how it goes.
That is awesome. What an awesome gift. Thank you, Kayle.
Mhm.
Well, I want to end with this is the Mama Thrive Summit, and I would love for you to complete the sentence. I thrive I thrive when
I thrive when I am in my element.
mm,
Like
mm-hmm.
like like doing things that I really love and get me really excited. And I do think that I adopt like a pleasure mindset, that I'm always looking and trying to find something to bring pleasure to my every moment. Right. And so I
Mm.
think about it in that way, like how can I thrive in just little ways? So it doesn't have to be big T thrive, but maybe it's tiny T thrive, and having that throughout my day.
I love that. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Kayle, for being
You're
with us.
welcome. Thank you for having me.